Imagine standing at the heart of a civilization that believes itself untouchable. Its cities stretch toward the sky. Its currency is trusted everywhere. Its power reaches across oceans. To those living inside it, collapse is unthinkable. History shows that this belief appears at the same moment in every empire's life cycle. Rome had it. So did Britain. Each time, the danger was not invasion or rebellion, but a quiet decision made inside the financial system. A decision that slowly hollowed the structure from within. That process has already begun again. The question is not whether it exists, but whether we are willing to recognize it before the foundations give way. To understand how an empire ends, you first have to understand how it begins. Rome did not rise on corruption or excess. In its early centuries, during the Roman Republic, it was built on discipline, restraint, and obligation. Roman citizens were not professional politicians or lifelong elites. They were farmers who took up arms when the Republic was threatened, then returned to their land once the danger had passed. Status came from service, not indulgence. Wealth was measured in stability, not spectacle. That mindset was reflected directly in Rome's money. For generation, time 0.3s. The Roman economy was anchored by the silver denarius, a coin struck from nearly pure silver. Its value did not depend on faith in the state. It depended on the metal itself. Anyone holding it understood exactly what they owned. This form of sound money rewarded saving, enabled long-term planning, and financed the infrastructure that made Rome powerful. Roads, aqueducts, and disciplined legions. The economy worked because the money was real. But success altered behavior. As Rome expanded, enormous wealth flowed back into the capital. The ruling class slowly transformed from producers into consumers. Military conquest brought gold and silver, but it also created expectations. By the time the Republic gave way to empire under Augustus Caesar, Rome controlled territory stretching from Britain to Egypt. Maintaining that scale required constant spending. Soldiers had to be paid, infrastructure repaired, and the urban population kept calm. This is where the balance began to break. Rome faced a growing population that produced less and demanded more. To prevent unrest, emperors distributed free grain and funded massive public entertainment. Bread and circuses were not luxuries. They were political necessity, time 0.5s, but they were expensive. As expansion slowed, the inflow of precious metals declined while obligations continued to rise. Rome developed a structural deficit. At that point, every empire encounters the same choice: reduce spending and face public anger, or increase taxation and confront the elite. Rome chose neither. Instead, it turned inward, toward its currency. That decision would not cause immediate collapse. It would do something far more dangerous. It would quietly undermine the trust holding the system together. The shift did not happen all at once. It began as a technical adjustment, framed as necessity rather than deception. Around the year 64, Emperor Nero faced mounting financial pressure. The empire's expenses exceeded its revenue, and political reality made spending cuts or tax increases unacceptable. Nero chose a third option. He recalled the silver denarius coins, melted them down, and mixed in cheaper base metals, such as copper. The newly minted coins looked identical to the originals. They carried the same markings and were declared equal in value, but they contained less silver, less reality. On paper, nothing had changed. In practice, the money supply had expanded without any corresponding increase in production. Nero had created purchasing power out of dilution. This was the ancient equivalent of money creation. At first, the effects were invisible. People accepted the coins. Trade continued. The illusion held. The danger of this mechanism is not the first use. It is the precedent. Later, emperors observed how easily short-term problems could be deferred. Each crisis was met the same way. More debasement. Slightly less silver. Over decades. Then centuries. The process accelerated. By the time of Marcus Aurelius, in the 2nd century, the denarius contained roughly 3/4 silver. 50 years later, it was closer to half. By the 3rd century, under Emperor Aurelian, the coin had lost nearly all intrinsic value. What remained was a bronze disc coated with a thin silver layer that wore away through use. This was not an accident. It was policy. Rome financed itself by quietly transferring wealth from savers to the state. The loss was gradual enough that resistance lagged behind reality. But economics does not tolerate illusion indefinitely. Time 0.5s. Eventually, the population recognized what the money had become. Merchants demanded more coins for the same goods. Soldiers questioned their pay. Trust began to fracture. Once that fracture appeared, the system entered a phase it could not reverse. The consequences surfaced with mathematical certainty. As the silver content vanished, prices adjusted upward to reflect reality. Goods did not become more valuable. The currency became less so. Records from the empire show the scale of the distortion. In the 2nd century, a fixed measure of wheat cost only a handful of drachmas. By the 3rd century, that same measure demanded hundreds of thousands. Savings accumulated over a lifetime were erased. Anyone who had trusted the system was punished for it. The Roman state responded the only way a failing monetary system can, with control. In the year 300 on, time 0.3s. Emperor Diocletian issued the edict on maximum prices. It attempted to freeze prices across the empire by law, backed by the threat of death. The policy assumed that inflation was a moral failure rather than a monetary one. It collapsed immediately. Merchants withdrew goods. Trade moved underground. Shortages spread. Enforcement only deepened the damage. As economic trust dissolved, the social contract followed. Soldiers stationed along the borders realized they were being paid in worthless metal. Loyalty weakened. Desertion increased. Defense deteriorated, not because Rome lacked enemies, but because it lacked credibility. The empire could no longer reward service or protect value. When external pressure finally arrived, it met a hollow structure. The sack of Rome in 410 was not a dramatic conquest. It was an entry into an exhausted system. The walls still stood. The institutions remained. But the foundation had already failed. The empire collapsed inward long before outsiders stepped through the gates. Monetary decay had done what armies could not. It removed the reason to defend the system at all. When the mirror turns toward the modern world, the pattern does not change. It repeats. The United States began, like Rome, with a monetary system constrained by reality. For much of its early history, the United States dollar represented a claim on gold. It was not valuable because the government said it was. It was valuable because it could be exchanged for something tangible. That limitation imposed discipline. Spending had consequences. Expansion required restraint. That framework supported the rise of an industrial power unlike anything before it. After the Second World War, the United States emerged as the dominant global force. Its currency became the foundation of international trade. Its military presence extended across continents. Prosperity followed, but so did transformation. Production slowly gave way to consumption. Debt replaced savings. Obligations multiplied. By the 1960s, the strain became visible. The United States was financing a global military presence while expanding large domestic welfare programs at the same time. Gold began leaving the treasury as foreign governments demanded conversion. The system could not hold. In 1971, President Richard Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar ceased to be convertible into gold. In that moment, it stopped being a receipt for value and became a fiat instrument, dependent entirely on confidence. What Rome accomplished by melting coins, the modern system achieved through policy. Currency creation was no longer constrained by metal or labor. It was limited only by keystrokes. Over time, the same mechanism reappeared. Deficits were covered by expansion. Debt grew faster than production. Each new unit of currency reduced the value of those already in circulation. The process was familiar. Only the speed had change. Times 0.5s. The acceleration is the defining difference. Rome was constrained by physics. Coins had to be collected, melted, and restruck. The modern system faces no such limits. Trillions can be created instantly and deployed at scale. What took centuries to unfold in the ancient world has been compressed into decades. The numbers reflect this shift. It took the United States more than 2 centuries to accumulate its first trillion in national debt. Today, that figure increases by another trillion in a fraction of the time. The mechanism is identical. New currency is created to purchase government debt, expanding the money supply without expanding real output. The effect is dilution. Each additional unit reduces the purchasing power of the units already earned and saved. Inflation is not an anomaly. It is the visible symptom of monetary expansion. It appears first in assets, then in necessities. Housing prices detach from income. Food costs rise faster than wages. Official statistics attempt to minimize the signal, but lived experience reveals the truth. As purchasing power erodes, social cohesion weakens. Those closest to the source of currency creation benefit first. Those dependent on wages fall behind. The gap widen. Time, 0.5s. Resentment grows. Political pressure makes restraint impossible. Cutting spending becomes unthinkable. Raising taxes becomes destabilizing. The system locks itself into continuation. Distraction fills the gap left by stability. Entertainment expands as confidence contracts. Dependency replaces independence. The structure still functions, but it does so by consuming its own foundation. This is the late stage of the cycle. Not collapse yet, but irreversible imbalance. History places boundaries on systems that refuse to recognize limits. Over 3,000 years, historians studying the rise and fall of dominant powers have observed the same sequence repeating. Expansion follows discipline. Wealth follows expansion. Excess follows wealth. Debt follows excess. Decline follows debt. The names change. The mechanics do not. From Assyria to Persia, from Greece to Rome, from the Ottoman Empire to the British Empire, the average lifespan of a global superpower has remained remarkably consistent. The United States declared independence in 1776. Add 250 years, and the result is not prophecy. It is a historical marker. By that point, every empire before it had already entered the final stage of the cycle. The stage defined by monetary distortion, overextension, internal division, and the belief that the rules no longer apply. Rome believed its currency would always be accepted because it was Rome. The modern system holds the same assumption, grounded in reserve status rather than silver. But reserve status is not immunity. When trust erodes, participation declines. The shift does not begin with collapse. It begins with quiet. Alternatives. Trade conducted outside the dominant currency. Reserves reduced. Debt questioned. This is how systems unwind. Not through invasion, but through refusal. Rome did not end the world when it fell. Life continued. What disappeared was the structure that had made life predictable and secure. Those dependent on the system suffered most. Those who understood the cycle adjusted before urgency replaced choice. The pattern has already revealed itself. The timeline is not a warning of a single year, but of a phase already underway. History does not ask whether a system believes it is different. Time 0.5s. It only observes whether it behaves the same. Every empire reaches a moment where the consequences of earlier decisions can no longer be delayed. Not reversed. Not managed. Only absorbed. In Rome, that moment arrived when the cost of maintaining the system exceeded the value the system could produce. The state continued to function, but only by transferring loss downward. Currency debasement did not destroy Rome overnight. It removed the incentive to defend it. When money no longer stored value, loyalty dissolved. Productivity collapsed. Defense became symbolic. The same dynamic defines the final phase of any monetary system built on expansion without restraint. Time 0.5s. Debt grows faster than income. Interest consumes a rising share of resources. Confidence becomes policy. When confidence weakens, the response is always the same. More creation, more intervention, more distance from reality. Each step postpones reckoning while increasing its scale. The year 2026 is not a countdown to collapse. It is a convergence point, a moment where historical averages, monetary pressure, and structural imbalance intersect. Rome did not fall because citizens believed it would. It fell because belief replaced discipline. Systems do not fail when people panic. They fail when assumptions go unchallenged for too long. History has already recorded this outcome many times. It does not repeat because of coincidence. It repeats because incentives remain unchanged. The final act is not chaos. It is normalization of instability. And by the time it is recognized, the choice to prevent it has already passed. When Rome finally dissolved, there was no singular moment that ended everything. No final announcement. No universal realization. The empire faded because the structure that sustained it had already failed. Currency no longer carried trust. Institutions no longer rewarded contribution. Authority no longer protected value. What remained was habit, ceremony, and the memory of power. Those who depended entirely on the system suffered most. Their savings disappeared. Their labor lost meaning. Their security vanished with the institutions they trusted. Those who endured were not the most intelligent or the most informed. They were the ones who recognized that the system itself was changing and adjusted before necessity forced their hand. They relied less on promises and more on tangible value, skills, and local resilience. History does not end with collapse. It resets. After Rome, life continued, but under different rules. Comfort declined. Stability fragmented. The world grew smaller and harsher. That transition was not evenly felt. It rewarded preparedness and punished dependence. The pattern has never changed. The cycle unfolding now does not require belief to continue. It requires only repetition. The mechanisms are already in motion. The decisions have already been made. The only remaining variable is awareness. History does not whisper its lessons. It repeats them until they are understood.